I'm Dhwani Mehta. I'm the co-founder of the Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy. Vidhi, for those of you who are being introduced to it for the first time, is an independent think tank that does legal research to make better laws and improve governance for the public good. And we think that the work that we do at the centre, assisting the Union Ministry to draft laws, has the same importance at the state level as well. That's why we have now a Karnataka state office, and we're very proud to have a Maharashtra one as well. And as a Mumbaikar, I'm especially proud to be introducing the work that the team has done and welcoming you all to this event today. So Vidhi's legal work spans a range of areas. We work on judicial reforms, corporate law and financial regulation, the environment, health, law and technology, fintech, inclusive rights. But there is one publication that brings the whole organization together every year, and that is the briefing book. So this is the organization's flagship publication where, and it's good practice for us as lawyers to be able to put our ideas down very briefly. So the idea is that in a small finite set of words, we are able to explain what we think some of the key legal and policy reforms that are needed across a range of areas. And usually the organization-wide briefing book is aimed at the central government, and then we have state-specific briefing books as well. So this is the one on Maharashtra. It's about Maharashtra moving forward.
But I was taken up by the enthusiasm and sheer passion of Orgel, who represented the passion of his colleagues, really. He was not a lone thinker. There were a group of people who had decided that more than the practice of law, the modernization of law was something worth doing, and that made sense. So I am only peripherally. I happen to be the person he talked about his idea when they were still completing a PhD, I think, at that time. And what it has become, and what it potentially represents, is the most thrilling thing that I have watched in the last 2 decades. So I'm very proud. I'm totally ignorant, but proud.
और हम क्यों बोल रहे हैं कि हम लोगों को जिंदा रहना है। हम इंसान करके जन्म लिए, हमको इंसान करके अच्छे तरह से जिंदा रहना है। जब तक हम जिंदा रहेंगे हम बोलेंगे, हम बात करेंगे।
Like Dhwani said earlier, the briefing book is Vidhi's flagship publication where we suggest legal reforms in a short and simple format, keeping in mind the 16 Sustainable Development Goals set forth by the UN. Vidhi's 2023 briefing book for Maharashtra suggests 15 legal reforms for a developed, sustainable, inclusive, equitable and well-governed Maharashtra. I would now request Justice Manohar to please come on stage.
As we look at democracies around the world, it becomes apparent that they are not working as they should. For the voice of reason and the voice of common sense to be heard, and for proper policies for the welfare of people to be framed, it is not enough that the population of a country casts its vote and elects lawmakers or law enforcers once in so many years. People need to remain well informed and vocal at all times, expressing their views. There also needs to be appropriate machinery through which their views can be considered and given effect to when required by elected power holders. Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy must be congratulated for trying to fill this void by well-informed briefs which can be advocated and which can be implemented.
Our topic today, is balancing economic growth and ecological sustainability. So my question to you is sustainable development really too idealistic? Is it even possible for development to be sustainable? Is it a very idealistic notion? Do you think both of them can be reconciled in some way? And if they can be, if development and environment can be reconciled in some way, if you could just tell the audience some examples that you must have encountered in your personal life, some projects, etc., where these two were reconciled successfully. So that is my first question to you.
I can do anything I want, but I am not in a position to hurt you with what I do. I cannot impinge upon your right in exercising my right. And it's a difficult balance to adjudicate, it's a difficult balance to define, but कुदरत जो है वो अजीब अलग सी किस्म की चीज है, वो आपकी नहीं मानेगी, मेरी नहीं मानेगी, जो होना है सो होना है. And one thing with nature is, with the biosphere, Your Honor, it gives you no judgments at all. It only gives you warnings and then consequences. There is no difference between biodiversity and climate change. Biodiversity is the immune system of our planet. If you take the biodiversity away, there is no chance for human beings to survive. And the economy, I'm a part of the problem. But the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the biosphere. And once that recognition comes into world leaders, into all those people, the negotiating diplomats who go to all over the world, then I think there is some hope that our children will remember us well.
In a court of law, there are hard questions asked and you have to rule, one way or the other. And sometimes those questions are easy questions and sometimes those questions are hard questions. Should a judge rule in favor of an infrastructure project that is, supposedly going to solve, Mumbai's pressing traffic, transportation issues, if that project is, eating up our open spaces or green cover?
And there are principles that are well established in environmental jurisprudence and environmental law. You will have somebody come and say, stop this chemical plant at Patalganga. So the first thing that begins to happen is the judge, because we have this body of law, we reverse the burden of proof and we ask the chemical plant to prove that the chemical plant is safe, not the petitioner to prove that the plant is unsafe. That's the way environmental law works. It has not evolved to the point where the chemical plant can say, look, I've met all the standards. I have nothing more to prove. Now tell the petitioner to establish why I'm not good. A lot of what happens in environmental law is actually impressionistic and is conditioned by what that particular judge thinks. Sometimes what mood he's in. It makes a difference. And what the issue is. If it's in a remote part of the country, it may not get the same attention as an issue that's on the judge's doorstep. This often happens.
I will tell you a little story about what happened in my court in the 70s. And I had a petition before me by a group of citizens challenging these late night shows during Ganpati festival and Navratri festival and so on, saying that there should be some limit on how long they can sort of use loudspeakers at night and so on. And I had government leader appearing before me for the state. And he said, what nonsense are these people talking about? How can noise pollute? It was a new concept at that time. Yeah, it's a true story. So he said, how can there be pollution by noise? I mean, he can understand some kachara or some dust lying on the floor, but noise he couldn't understand. So, I mean, you get such cases where you have to deal with total ignorance also. And recently you might have heard about light pollution, with all these lights, LED lights all around the city. Of course it looks pretty, but then the question is, does it also pollute, and how do you control things? So unless you have precise knowledge, it's very difficult to balance what is good and what is to be controlled. So I think basic problem with environmental issues is that you have to balance what is required for human well-being as against what is in the long term. Both are for human well-being, but you have to balance what is good for the environment and what is good for individual to earn a living also. So I think these are very difficult problems. They are not easy of solution, and we need more expertise on this.
So, from your experience, if you could just elaborate a bit on what does community participation mean in decision making, environmental policy and decision making, as well as governance, and this entire politics of community participation, which you've extensively worked on. If I'm very curious to know about it, so if you could just elaborate a bit.
Thank you for that final question. Okay. Allow me to talk for about 2-3 facets of this issue that I want to bring forth. Okay? And the first is, I think, so far what I've heard is basically that when we think about environment, when we think about sustainable development, it is like a collective group. Okay? I think the unfortunate reality, perhaps a human reality, as Sambhaji would put it, is something that the world that we have constructed is a highly unequal world. It has multiple divisions, and perhaps even more, what we have done in this world is that we have empowered certain people through their expertise, through the very acts of democracy, in such a way that today the citizen herself is not in charge of either shaping, voicing, or taking any decisions about their immediate environment. South Mumbai, and where we are located clearly just now, is like the hub. This has to have the maximum open spaces. This has to have the greatest prevention for air pollution. Because whatever happens, see, if there is flooding in the suburbs of Mumbai, if Ms ward has pollution, who cares? One cares about it only if one is going to Pune, right? No? And I think it is this kind of injustice which is embedded, the iniquity in these risks, that we need to confront head on today. Only then will our discussions of environment, discussions of sustainability even have some meaning. So you have people who use the least resources, generate the least amount of waste, but who would carry and be exposed to the ill impacts of the highest amount of pollution. What do we have to say to that? And I think that is what, I think it is these kind of questions. So I am not very, very optimistic towards either law, neither am I very optimistic towards judgments, because I have often seen that it is the weak who are often who are not even visibilized. Their ill impacts do not even come into discussion. And therefore, within all of this, I know I am standing and sitting here in a gallery of legal luminaries, but yet I would dare to say this, that really we need to visualize some of these issues before law. And I think just as we are talking about expertise, which is, I think, still evolving in relation to what do we know about nature, what do we know about the biosphere, but I think we should, with all humility, also acknowledge that definitely all human beings are entitled to some level of development, some level of dignity, and the beginning has to be made from there.
The question would be, like I said, are sustainable cities only sustainable if they are inclusive cities?
let me tell you this. I began practice, Justice Manohar was already a judge, but I think in the time that I saw her in the Bombay High Court, there was a steady arc or trajectory of the kind of cases that she was getting when she began and the kind of things that she was seeing when she left for the Supreme Court. And what she was probably seeing was a rising amount of inequity and inequality. This is something that we see more and more on a daily basis. I would talk more about an equitable city and a just city. This is a question really of balance, of justice. Now let me give you, this again I agree with Dr. Bhide. South Mumbai is not Mumbai and Mumbai is not India. It's not. And South Mumbai has privileges which we take for granted and we should not. Even in South Mumbai, there are horrendous things. D Ward is a classic example. It's sort of divided vertically by the railway lines. On one side, you've got people who have one bucket of water up 3 floors of steps to serve the entire household. On the other side, you've got the highest concentration of private swimming pools anywhere in the city. Somebody explain this to me. In one ward. In one ward. Where's the rightness in this? What's the answer to this? There is a huge question which we confront about not only individual actions. In our writ petitions that come before us, we deal with the individual actions by some administration, but when you pull back and look at them, you ask, what is the quality of governance? Why are people afraid to do the right thing, saying, no, you go and get an order from the court? This is what Justice Manohar began to see at the end of her time. This book is probably, at least for Maharashtra, a good springboard. Not all of it can be done all at once, but certainly there are starting points here that we need to action further towards this larger objective. Thanks a lot.
We should end this conversation on a positive note, on a hopeful note. And I'd just like to, pick out what Justice Patel said is that, I know judges deal with like retail cases, one-off cases here and there, but I guess like one day at a time, one case at a time is hopefully how we would change the world. With those words, we'd end the panel discussion today. I'd once again like to thank everybody who's joined us today for all this discussion.